بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم. نويت التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاء والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله عز وجل وسنة رسوله والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى، وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to all our dear respected listeners and guests from around the world. Alhamdulillah, once again, through the barakah and the sincerity of our listeners, through the barakah of Mama and Ismail and Riyaz and their passion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has accepted us to enter into the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam once again in this beautiful month of Ramadan in the state of fasting, to be in the companionship of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and those who are in his companionship sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As we do, we have a short recap before we begin. Yesterday, we discussed that moment when the Prophet ﷺ had lost his mother, and after seeing the grave of his father and losing now his mother as well, he had to go back and journey back to Mecca with his Ayman radiallahu anha, who was like an aunt around the house of the Prophet ﷺ, who now become like a mother to the Prophet ﷺ. And we discussed how he lived in without his father's shelter, without his mother's warmth and love, or without his own home, without his own clothes, without his own food, without the a luxury of just being able to go cry and put his head on his mother's lap and being able to be a child. Without any of these luxuries, he went as a guest in the house of his grandfather, who no doubt treated him like his own and like his own son. But the Prophet ﷺ knew, as we all know, that this isn't my own home. I'm a guest taken care of by my grandfather. And until 2 years pass by and his grandfather also passes away, and we witness that moment when the Prophet ﷺ is seen just as an 8-year-old boy following the janazah with tears in his eyes, almost as though he's saying, I don't want to let go of you. And he had to witness now the burial and the janazah and the soil falling on the body of his grandfather, giving him memories back to 2 years before when he had seen the same for his mother. And then we said that after that moment, he enters into the home of Abu Talib, from a guest of one house to the guest of another house. And here we see that although Abu Talib would treat him as his own, he would always remember the adab and etiquette, and he would always remain in the sideline, until we see that the wife of Abu Talib, Fatima bint Asad, sees that when all the food comes in this massive tray, and all the kids just go in, and as kids do, they rummage into that food. But then when this one innocent child just stands in a corner quietly with so much respect, so much adab, and when all the children are finished, he just goes in and he just eats a little bit of this, ruins, if you will, of that the children have made, this mess that the children have made. He'll take a few bites reluctantly and he'll walk away and go away. And that takes the heart of Fatima bint Asad so much through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's acceptance, that she then goes, and after a few days of seeing this, one of the days she goes and she takes this beautiful child and she takes a special plate out for him and feeds him with her own hands and looks after him from the warmth of her heart, because she's fully attached to this child, even more than her own children, her own household. That is how much love she had for the Prophet ﷺ, and Allah accepted her, such that her and Ayman are the two women that would be the closest thing to her mother that the Prophet ﷺ had, that Allah had accepted. And he ﷺ would never forget that, such that even years later, even Nabu, he'd say, Ummi ba'da ummi, she is my mother after my own mother. And as we said, he actually, when Fatima bint Asad passed away, he sees Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam went into the grave of Fatima bint Asad, and he made sure that his body touched that soil, almost showing Allah that, look, this is, and as he said, Ummi ba'da ummi, this is the grave of my mother, the one who is my mother after my own mother. And Ayman, on the other hand, she lived even past the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, but she was the one who the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam freed as soon as he could, and said to the people, if anyone wants to marry a woman of Jannah, marry Ayman. That's how he never forgot. And one point to note here is Ayman was an African woman who was a slave. The one woman who Allah has chosen, accepted to be in the position of the mother of the Prophet ﷺ, was had the honor of being an African woman, and she was a slave who Allah honored, showing that slavery doesn't mean anything. And the Prophet ﷺ freed her to become to show her honor. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. That was Ayman Baraka radiallahu anha. And Adhan Fatima bint Asad, who also becomes the mother of Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu later on. And we discussed how this time went on, and how Abu Talib would also keep his nephew as close as possible to him, with that love and that care that he had. And then we discussed that beautiful moment, that although all these people were kafir, they were people who were overlooking the Prophet ﷺ, the ultimate shelter of the Prophet ﷺ, the ultimate care of the Prophet ﷺ came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that signified that cloud that would never leave the shelter of the Prophet ﷺ. That was the signification that Allah never left His beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we discussed how the people of Makkah had come, who had come into Makkah, came to Abu Talib as the one who of the elder leaders, and complained about the drought and the lack of rain. And we discussed that as they left the house and Abu Talib was going to the Kaaba with the audience of Makkah to pray this invocation of rain, they noticed that that cloud was above this innocent child Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they noticed that whenever everyone else was invoking for rain, nothing was happening. But when that beautiful child above, who was that one cloud, looked up to the sky, يَسْتَسْقَى الْغَمَامُ بِوَجْهِهِ, as Abu Talib said, that the clouds were irrigated by the beauty of his face, as though Allah had kept his face so beautiful that when he looked to the sky, even the clouds couldn't deny him. Even they rushed to gaze their tears upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like tears of love, tears of joy. This was the incident that we discussed that happened with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as he went through 8, 9, 10 years old in the city of Makkah. And from this moment onwards, we will continue today in our seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As is the practice, we request everyone to recite salawat upon our beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidun Majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidun Majid. So now from this moment onwards, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is in the care of Abu Talib, his uncle. And he is growing up from 10, 11, 12 in the care of his uncle and becoming more and more closely attached to his uncle, almost as though he was like becoming a shadow to his uncle. Like, I don't want to let go of you either. I can't lose you either. In this innocent age of 11 and 12, the Prophet ﷺ starts to approach his teenage years. And during this time, Abu Talib, he was also entering into the trade of business. So Abu Talib then goes in various travels for his business and various other reasons. So when the Prophet ﷺ is 12 years old, Abu Talib, he then sets out towards Syria and Basra for a business trip. And whilst he is on route to this business trip, he takes the Prophet ﷺ with him. As we said, he would always be with him. Now, what happens is, whilst they are traveling in the scorching desert, we have to understand the scene that this isn't, our M65 motorways or beautiful countryside roads. This is the open desert. So you're in the open desert, you've got a scorching desert sun with you, rain or shine, afternoon, you have to continue. Rain would have been better for them, but they have to continue in this scorching heat. And whilst they're continuing, it's just open, and every so often you might see some grasslands, some pastures, a bit of a house settlements, or maybe a well. And besides that, it's just open land, and you just have to keep going on and keep going to your journey until you reach Syria, etc. Now, whilst they are traveling, what happens is, they are crossing a path in this open desert, and they begin to go through a place where there's settlements and some homes, but spread out. And within one of these homes, it was actually a monastery. It was the home of a monk known as Bahira, a Christian monk who had dedicated his life to the asceticism of just, away from dunya, away from any worldly activities, just in the dhikr and the remembrance and meditation of his creator. And Bahira, he is in his monastery, he is by his window, just remembering and meditating, and he sees from the distance, he sees the caravan, the load of camels and horses of Abu Talib with his business men and his fellow colleagues traveling in the distance. And when he sees this, he starts to marvel. And the one person who, he's a Zahid, he's a monk, he leaves everything of the world, he's just focused on his meditation. He stands up, he leaves his meditation, and he calls the people of his monastery and says, go in that direction and go and catch up with that caravan and make sure you call them towards us as soon as you can. So now, as this, his assistants go out, his khuddam go out, and they go and try to catch up with this caravan, he calls many of the other people and says, start preparing a feast. Get some food on the table, get some olive oil, get some bread, and they start preparing this feast for these people who he hasn't even met. He doesn't even know who they are. They're just, little, small, tiny camels and people in the distance that he can see. Until the Khadim of Bahira comes to the door and says, I've managed to catch up with them and I've called them. And he says, yes, welcome them in. So the entire caravan of Abu Talib is welcomed in, and this table spread is set out for them, and all of them begin to sit on their various seats. And Bahira is now anxiously standing there. And now remember, he is the host. They don't know, Abu Talib and the fellow colleagues of Makkah don't know who this person is. Neither does he know who they are. And it was a custom of the Arabs that, and many of the people, if they saw travelers, sometimes they would invite them for a meal. So Abu Talib and the fellow colleagues are waiting for this host to, prepare the meal and say salam to them, greet them, and introduce himself and, show his hospitality. But Bahira is, he's perplexed, he's anxious, and he's looking at every one of them, almost scanning saying, okay, you, and though he's looking for someone or for something, until the food is on the table, they're hungry. Like I said, they in the scorching desert heat, they just come through this difficult journey. It's time to dig in, and they're waiting. They can't, and there was it was etiquette. They can't just start without the host. And whilst they were waiting for Bahira to give them the go ahead, Bahira says, "Who's your leader? Who's the leader of this caravan?" So they naturally say Abu Talib. So Abu Talib stands up, greets Bahira, and Bahira looks at everyone, and then he says, "Okay, have you brought everyone with you, or have you left anyone behind?" And Abu Talib is thinking, the food's on the table, everyone's waiting. You welcomed us in so nicely, and now, since we've come in, all you can do is scan us, ask who the leader is, and now you're asking me, is this everyone? So Abu Talib naturally says, yes, this is everyone. I guess, have you left everyone behind? He said, no, haven't left anyone behind, except we left a child behind. Because we don't know who you are. Naturally, when you go in to someone's house, you've never met them before. We don't always, on a first meeting, we don't always take our children, because although we don't, our children might be well behaved or not well behaved. But at the end of the day, we know that the opposite person might feel a bit disrespectful, saying, you brought your child to my house. He could have messed about. She could have messed about. He could have done something. So generally, on a first meeting, we don't always take our children. So naturally, Abu Talib, out of that etiquette, saying, this is a person we've never met. He's a monk. It might seem disrespectful to take a child, even though Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the most angelic of children. But as an adab and etiquette, he left the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam behind, and he left him in a safe place just outside of the house. So as soon as Bahira hears this, Bahira says, where is this child? And before Abu Talib can even respond, Bahira runs out to his home, opens the door, and he looks straight outside of his house, and Bahira's face goes pale. And Abu Talib, obviously, who walks behind him, is looking at Bahira, thinking, what's up? What's wrong? And all he can see is Bahira is looking straight, like he's completely paled out. He's excited, he's elated, but at the same time, he feels like awestruck. And he turns to Abu Talib and says, who is that boy? Because they could see Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam right in front of him. And what did Bahira see? When Bahira opened the door, there was a tree right in front of Bahira's house. And Bahira is looking at this tree, and under that tree is the angelic 12-year-old innocent Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam sitting in the shade of that tree. And Bahira watches that scene, and he is so awestruck. He turns and he says to Abu Talib, who is this boy? And Abu Talib says, this is my nephew. This is the boy, the child that we left behind. So Bahira immediately runs up to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sitting under the shade of this tree, and he begins to pull the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And now you imagine 12-year-old Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam innocently sitting under the tree, and this big monk just suddenly comes up to you, grabs you, pulls you up, and then he's looking left, right, examining you, turning you around, taking your thobe off, and he's looking at, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is wondering what's going on, and likewise Abu Talib is wondering what's going on, until Bahira then eventually goes to the back of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, uncovers the back of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then he's shook. He turns around and he's lost for words. He's so excited, but at the same time he's almost pale-faced. He's awestruck, and he turns to Abu Talib and he says, "This is your nephew." And Abu Talib says, "Yes." And at this moment, Bahira says, "The reason why I called you is because I claim to be a man of God. I claim to be a monk. I dedicate my life to God. I read the scriptures. I read the works of our saints. And I know the signs of a prophet. And I know the signs of those who are specially sent by Allah. And when I was worshipping and meditating in my monastery, from the distance, I saw that in this clear sky, when your caravan was walking, there was only one cloud that was above your caravan, and that cloud was following your caravan. And I knew that this only happens. This is one of the atharat, one of the signs that are in the books of the pious saints and our scriptures of a man of God. So I had to meet this person that Allah loves so much that He is shading him with His cloud constantly. This signification of Allah constantly watching over him and looking after him and distinctively caring for him like no one else. And that is why I made sure that my khadim went and caught up with you and called you straight away, because I wanted to meet who this individual was. Who is this great man? But when you came in, I looked at all of you and I knew it wasn't any of you. No offense, but it wasn't any of you. So I asked you, is anyone left behind? And you said that that child is left behind. So I was so excited. I was so impatient that I ran, not even knowing where you left your child behind. But when I opened the door, I saw that not only had I been struck by the beauty and the spiritual angelance of this child, but at the same time, I was struck by the tree that I have seen outside my house for years and decades. And I know this tree inside out. I see it every day outside of my house. But today that tree is transformed, that tree is changed, because all of the branches of the tree have caved in. And I know this tree. This tree's branches were not like this. And when I looked above this tree, I noticed that that cloud that I was following and I was following you was stood still right above this tree, shading the child beneath this tree, and the tree that had actually turned and curved its branches to shade this child. And at that moment, I knew this is the man of God. So I couldn't wait to say, maybe he's a prophet of God. Maybe he has that beautiful seal that we've been yearning to see for years upon years. And we've heard about it in our scriptures and the books of our saints. So I ran up until eventually I uncovered his torso, and I saw that beautiful seal. This is the seal of prophethood. And he was just trying to convince Abu Talib, saying, you have no idea who you've got in your midst. Your nephew is a prophet of God. Your nephew is a special child. Your nephew is a leader of the world. Abu Talib, he's listening to this, and like we said, Abu Talib was one of those who, although he was the more better of the children of Abdul Muttalib, he had also sunk into the idol worship. Unfortunately, after as the years went by, living in the Makkah society, he was sucked into a lot of the customs of Jahiliyyah. So he's surrounded by a Makkah that has predominantly, pagans and idol worshippers who had, were making their own religion up, as was the monopoly of the leaders. But there was occasionally the people of the book, Ahl Kitab, Christians and Jews, as we mentioned, like the person who inspected the Prophet ﷺ when he was born, just days within his birth. There were people who would come into Makkah and who would talk about a prophet to come. And whenever a Jewish person would do business with an Arab, if he was cheated, he would always give them, threats that don't worry, when the final prophet comes, we'll show you who's boss. We'll, get payback for everything you've done to us. So Abu Talib is just thinking, this is another one of those, claims that we hear from these people of the book who are constantly going on about this prophet to come. So he's just like, okay, cool, nice to meet you. I'm just gonna get going now. And he just takes his nephew, and the Bahida's like, you don't understand, mark my words, this is a final prophet. And the Prophet ﷺ is just 12 years old, just innocent, wondering what's happening. And he's also, heard these stories, he's heard these things. And likewise, his uncle and the colleague just, quickly get up swiftly and just, let's move on. Because for them, they almost see this as crazy talk. Like, these guys are, what they are on about prophet. And they just thought, you know what, before any eyes or harm comes to our nephew, let's just grab Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and let's go. So they got back on their caravan and they continued to Syria and back to Makkah. And like this, there were many incidents in Makkah and around where people would come to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam or come to the uncle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and mention different things that they had seen, that this child isn't normal, this child is special. Hazrat Amina radiallahu anha knew that there was something special about her son, as is mentioned from what she told Hazrat Halima Sa'diyah and what she narrated herself to the other women, and what she said to her beloved son sallallahu alaihi wasallam in her emotional final words. But Abu Talib is hearing this and he's like, okay, you know what, it's probably just that same old crazy talk that we hear again and again and again. And this continued to increase until many more people started to do the same thing. And as years went by, the Prophet ﷺ went from 12 to 13 to 14 to 15. And when he's in these beautiful teenage years, the most beautiful angelic teenage boy that the world has ever seen, Muhammad ﷺ, as he's walking in the streets of Makkah, becoming more and more familiarized with the city of Makkah and its practices and customs, and becoming more and more versed as he saw, even from that age, the purity of his heart, knew what was right and wrong. And during this time, he was growing up upon the millat Ibrahim. Allah had destined within his heart that his heart would only go towards the way of the Sharia of Ibrahim alayhi salam. That was the way Allah naturally made his disposition follow towards. During this time, we know that we have the 4 sacred months in Islam, the Ashurul Hurum, and these were sacred prior to our ummah. And the Makkahs also knew this. And one of the things that is prohibited during this time is fighting and war. And one of the things that is prohibited within Makkah and the Haram is fighting and war, or killing anything. Even, sometimes you have to be very careful of even the insects of the Haram, because that is the sanctity of Masjid al-Haram. We call it Masjid al-Haram. Haram meaning not it's haram, as in it's not prohibited, but it's so sanctified that even those things that are usually halal become haram there. That's why when we are in a state of ihram, it means we are in such a sanctified and pure state, in such a sanctified and pure location, that even those things that are normally halal, like cutting your hair, etc., become haram in that state. So these were the things that weren't allowed in this sanctified place. But like everything else, they would easily violate anything for their own jahiliyyah and for their own needs. And Makkah had become a society that was so, as we said, sunken in jahiliyyah and wars and fighting and greed, that they would fight even over a horse race. As it comes in riwayat, they had a race of either camels or horses, etc. And one losing party was a bit of a sore loser, so they took a stone and pebble, threw it towards the other group. It damaged the animal. They threw it back. They started fighting. This turned into a war, and this war went on and on and on until people had died and given birth, and generations were being born. And each day it was like their daily work, 9 to 5 kind of thing. They wake up in the morning. What are we doing today? Same as every day. Let's go fight the war. And this war continued for generations upon generations until all of the original elders of the war had kind of died or grown old and died. And the new youngsters are saying, wait a minute, why are you fighting again? And when they couldn't remember why they're fighting, they said, forget this, we've got better things to do. And they just dropped the swords and walked off. But was the situation in Makkah. This is the level of ignorance and jahiliyyah. So these people that were literally born with a rock in their hands. One thing leads to another, and during this beautiful 15th year of the Prophet ﷺ, they begin to have a fight known as the War of the Miscreants, or the sacrilegious wars, that were fought within these sacred months. And the Prophet ﷺ was very averse to this. And many of these uncles who, as we said, were sunken into the customs of Jahiliyyah, were fighting in this war. And they were urging the Prophet ﷺ, saying, you're 15 now. And 15-year-olds back then and 15-year-olds now, two different things. 15-year-olds back then were almost half men. Not like now. And the Prophet ﷺ is the greatest of men and the greatest of 15-year-olds, the greatest of teenagers. So he's being instructed and pushed by his uncles and family to participate in the war, until he's pushed so much that the Prophet ﷺ, he just shows that he's so averse to all this fighting, all these pointless battles, because he wasn't someone who came to pick up swords and fight for no reason. He wasn't someone he loved war. And he told the Sahaba not to love fighting and bloodshed. He never loved these things. He was averse to all these things. That was the purity of his heart. So the Prophet ﷺ is forced onto the battlefield. And the most he did was avoid any fighting, just passed arrows or passed whatever he could to those who were fighting, so that he would have to avoid fighting and at the same time not upset his uncles. But that was him ﷺ trying his best. We all know what it's like when you're young and sometimes your family and your elders pressure you into doing something and you're saying, it's wrong, I can't do this. But at the same time, you have to kind of strike that balance in between. So the Prophet ﷺ knows in his heart this is wrong. But because of the pressure of his elders, he has to kind of just participate in this form. And this war causes a lot of damage to Makkah. It causes a lot of lives to be lost, a lot of damage to homes and lives and livelihoods and structures and all sorts, until eventually the war is ended. And this war that, like we said, takes place in the violation of the sacred months, eventually comes to an end. And the aftermath of that is like any war. Makkah is almost in ruins now. People have lost their husbands. Children have become orphaned. People have lost their livelihoods. Houses have been destroyed. Lives have been destroyed. In the aftermath of this now, a group of people who were named as Fadl, Ibn Fudala and Fudail, etc. came together, and they said, let's form a coalition. Let's form a pact. Let's launch an organization that will work on the welfare of rebuilding Makkah. Rebuilding Makkah from the victims of war and from the aftermath of this war that has taken place. The innocents, the widows, the orphans, those who have lost their livelihood, empowerment projects. Let's work together to form this coalition. And because of the people who were initially starting it off were named Fadl and Fudail, etc., it became known as Hilf al-Fudul or Half al-Fudul. This coalition then had many of the people, including the Zubayr ibn Abdul Muttalib, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, who became one of the main forerunners of this organization, this international aid relief organization, this humanitarian organization that got together. And whilst the Prophet ﷺ had to be forced to just step on the battlefield, when it came to the bloodshed and the mess, the Prophet ﷺ was averse. He wanted to be away from it. But when it came to the welfare of sorting out that mess and rebuilding the lives, the Prophet ﷺ his heart was open to this. And he said in Nubuwwah that if someone was to start Hilf al-Fudul again, I would be the first to join. I would love to join. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. His heart was naturally inclined towards rebuilding lives, rebuilding homes, helping the orphans, helping the widows, even at this age of 15, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. That was our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And from this age, he starts to grow from 15 to 16 to 17 to 18, 19, 20, until his teenage years end, and he starts to kind of enter into the peak of entering manhood, to the peak of his youth, entering into his early 20s. And as he enters into his early 20s, he starts to grow from youth to more into the adulthood, more into manhood. And as he does, he starts to under the teachings that he's seen of his uncle, etc., he starts to go into becoming a hardworking man, Even though he was an orphan, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that had nothing of his own, he starts to, on his own 2 feet, with not a penny in his hand, he starts to work hard and starts to earn money and starts to look at the various trades, starts to learn how business works. And innate within him, Allah had kept that purity that made sure that no matter what he learned and no matter where he went, he wouldn't be affected by the bad of that environment. He would simply look and take in. And this was such that even when he is at his age, we all know what, lads at 20, 19, 21, we know what we get up to. We know what happens. We know what, the shisha bars and, Facebook, Snapchat, all of these things, whether it's virtual or real, we know what goes on. And likewise, Makkah had these things. Makkah had, the stuff that the elders, they do their bit. When it comes to the teenagers, all of the elders who likewise, we have to remember the Prophet ﷺ is aristocratic blood, royal blood. He's the son of the leader, the grandson of the leader. And likewise, all of those other leaders, their sons were like the princes of Makkah. They were the rich, the coolest guys, the most handsome guys, the most, well-fed, well-dressed guys. And these are the ones who are always in the, main clubs of Makkah, because they had these kind of nightclubs, they had these kind of shisha bars and all these things that they would do for their social activities. And many of them, knowing that the Prophet ﷺ is meant to be on their par, they would come and say, come on, you want to be one of us. Dress up like us. Let's go. Let's go and enjoy these things. But the Prophet ﷺ always felt, it's okay, you guys go ahead. Something in his heart, even though he might not have been able to put it in words, something in his heart, just because he was on the millah of Ibrahim, the pure way of Ibrahim alayhi salam, Allah just made his heart feel averse to it. Until he would rather go and be a hardworking person and learn about the importance of responsibility in life as an orphan, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And the Prophet ﷺ used to be working, and it comes to such a scenario that one of the days he went out and he was working until one of the other young lads that he was working with, they noticed that down the stream of the hill, there was like this kind of youth party or youth gathering that was going on. And it was one of the social events that the kind of youngsters were going to. And they start talking and they say, should we go and check it out? Everyone seems to be doing it. This seems to be what our, the boys of our age seems to be doing. Why don't we go have a look? So he takes the Prophet ﷺ with him at this innocent age of 19, 20, 21. They go and they enter into this place, and the Prophet ﷺ just looks around. And the moment he starts approaching the place, and the moment he enters, he feels very uneasy. And he just sits down. He's not, mingling with anyone. He's just looking around at this place. And because of the purity of his heart, he feels uneasy, like there's something wrong here. And eventually the Prophet ﷺ just stands up and he just leaves. He says, no, this isn't for me, in other words. And he just leaves, and never again. That was the last time, first and last time. He never ever entered even into the presence of these gatherings, because Allah had kept his heart pure away from these gatherings that were covered with alcohol, wine, women who were being used as belly dancers and all sorts of haram music, everything that was happening. This was what he should develop to. But this wasn't even one of those nighttime ones where there was women and music. It was just a plain normal kind of socializing gathering where people just come and just laugh and drink and talk. But even then, the Prophet ﷺ was just so averse, and he said, I can't stay in this environment. My heart just doesn't feel right. And that is a minimum as a believer. When we go to such settings, we should always feel uneasy, because if we start to feel comfortable there is something wrong with our iman and something wrong with our heart. We have gone way past the line. So the Prophet ﷺ, even before Nubuwwah, this was the purity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had instilled within his heart. And from this age, he begins to develop from the age of 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25 until he reaches the peak of his manhood. And now we're not looking at the same child that was born in the arms of Hazrat Amina radiallahu anha. We're not looking at the 2-year-old sallallahu alaihi wasallam that went with Hazrat Halima Sa'diyah radiallahu anha to Banu Sa'ad. We're not looking at the 4-year-old that came back to Hazrat Amina radiallahu anha. Not the 6-year-old that cried as he lost his mother sallallahu alaihi wasallam in that utmost pain. Not the 8-year-old that lost his grandfather and was a guest from the house of his grandfather to the house of his uncle. Not the 12-year-old that was innocently following his uncle. Not the 19, 20-year-old that was trying to work hard and learn the responsibilities of life. Now we have Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the man, the one who had who beautiful, tall body and muscular form. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam now had reached his height of manhood. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was, as it comes in the riwayah, not very short and neither very tall. There were some people who were very, very tall. Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu is estimated to be about 9 foot tall. And there were others who were very, very short. Because people of Makkah was like this multicultural city. People were from outside, from different places, and they were varying heights, varying forms and identities. The Prophet ﷺ is at a perfect height, a height 6.3 foot. 6.3 foot of height, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which was just a perfect height. And not just then, but to this date, if you look at the perfection of height, everyone, go ask the women. You know, if they say if they're looking for a man, it's got to be 6 foot plus, because that is the hallmark of beauty. Even 14 centuries later, the perfect person, 6 foot onwards, has to be 6 foot onwards. And if you look at there was a study done by a group that looked at the most successful people in the world in our time, the CEOs and the founders of the Fortune 100, 500s, and the Fortune 100 companies, the 100 most successful businesses in the world, the leaders of the world, and all of those people unanimously that had reached this threshold, they took all of them and started studying their traits from what they had learned, what they had studied, and also their genetics, to see whether genetics had a role in determining who you had become. And every one of them, without fail, was 6 foot and above in their research. And they showed that genetic was a trait of all of those that became leaders of the world or leaders in business in our time, right now. And who knows, as Sheikh Ibrahim, a beautiful teacher, my teacher, mentioned, that maybe because they share this quality of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, maybe that's why Allah has put them in this form of success. That was a beautiful height of this beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam of ours, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is now 25 years old, in the peak of his youth, 6'3" in height. And from starting from the top, he has beautiful black glossy hair that is neither curly, neither frizzy, neither completely straight and flat, but lively, healthy, with volume, and with a perfect, beautiful wave, as it came as beautiful black glossy locks coming down from his forehead down till his earlobes and just below, or sometimes till his shoulders, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as those beautiful zulfa, those beautiful locks came down upon his beautiful gleaming face, that was neither round, neither square, but just perfectly shaped in perfect proportion, with a beautiful gleaming complexion that can be only compared to one thing. They used to try and describe the various examples through which they could say the color of the skin of the Prophet ﷺ. And in the end, all of the Sahaba said, we failed. We can't give you an exact description. But the one thing that they got closest to this beautiful wheat type skin complexion of the Prophet ﷺ was, if you look at the moon, we are approaching now, coming towards the 14th, 15th. If you look towards the moon on the 15th onwards, you'll see that the moon reaches this beautiful glow when it's at its fullest, in its fullest glory. And it starts to come this slight tint of a light cream wheat kind of color that comes within the moon. The Sahaba said that was the nearest thing to the skin color of the Prophet ﷺ. But yet they said the moon falls short, because the Prophet ﷺ's skin and face was even more beautiful. So you have this beautiful 6'3" tall, beautiful, muscular, handsome Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with these beautiful jet black, glossy, wavy, healthy, voluminous locks, and his beautiful wheat-like skin complexion gleaming with beauty. That was neither very pale white, nor was it extremely over tanned or over dark or over colored. It was just beautiful with a tint of this wheat color and this beautiful complexion that was neither white, neither black, but right in the middle. And you had the beautiful arched eyebrows of the Prophet ﷺ, thick arched eyebrows with absolute perfection, the long eyelashes of the Prophet ﷺ, the large eyes that captivated every single person that looked at them, with the extreme whiteness of the eye and the darkness of the pupil, with absolute perfection, the beautiful aquiline nose of the Prophet ﷺ, the beautiful wide arched mouth of the Prophet ﷺ, which is a sign of eloquence. Whenever we are praying, whenever we are speaking, those people who have smaller mouths, smaller mouth arches, they struggle to articulate their words clearer, because when we speak, we need the width of our mouth, we need the width and the opening of our mouth to give us the full articulation of speech. And those in the English language, sometimes we won't really see that differentiation. But when we study Arabic, those who know Tajweed, they are forced to open their mouth to the widest capability. For the Prophet ﷺ, that was a natural trait. And also from a trait of beauty, we see that with the lips, when they are naturally wider, they increase beauty in a person. Whereas when they are small, they decrease the beauty in a person. But the Prophet ﷺ's lips were beautifully formed, and he had a wide arched mouth through which he could articulate his words absolutely beautifully. And on this gleaming, beautiful complexion was a beautiful, dark, black beard, thick, dense, and wavy, that the Prophet ﷺ would keep as a stark contrast of his skin, absolutely beautiful black glossy beard that wasn't stringy, that wasn't thin. It was thick and it was dense, and he was looked after from the sides, from the bottom, and a beautiful mustache that was trimmed with the skin of his lips visible. and it would thin down towards this side, towards the sides of his mouth. It would thin down slightly, and the rest would be thick and dense. On these beautiful, wide, broad shoulders, and this beautiful gleaming neck that the Sahaba would say was like the shimmering of silver. That's how clean his neck was. And this is a sign of the purity of the Prophet ﷺ. Because many of us, when we don't look after ourselves and we don't clean ourselves, we don't bathe regularly, our neck becomes darkened and it becomes different to the complexion of our skin. But the Prophet ﷺ's neck was gleamingly beautiful. As they said, like the reflection of chrome, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that beautiful, beautiful head and neck on his beautiful, wide, broad shoulders. Beautifully wide, broad shoulders with a physique that was arching down towards a V form. From the wide, broad shoulders going down towards a V form with a beautifully plated chest and beautifully perfect, eloquent abs on the Prophet ﷺ's beautiful flat body that had by natural physique. The Prophet ﷺ had a six-pack on his beautiful body. So you have this beautiful face with the beautiful black locks of the Prophet ﷺ, the beautiful dense beard, the gleaming face on the shining, shimmering neck on his beautiful wide, broad shoulders, with a physique going down towards the wide plated chest and a V form with the beautiful, perfect abs of the Prophet ﷺ. And that is not just a sign of beauty, but a sign of perfection. Those people, right now we have this craze in our time where people are trying everything to go to the gym, and all of the guys seem to want to go to the gym and get this six-pack and get these abs. But in reality, it's not just about physical looks or aesthetic appearance. Having that is a sign of one of the things is that the least amount of fat or the least amount of waste on your body, when all of that is shredded, or when you get to like 7% body fat or 6% body fat, and you get to this low percentage of body fats, you reach a stage where your body is in peak physical condition. But the Prophet ﷺ was created like that naturally by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That without any protein shakes, without any gymming, he was naturally in that beautiful physique, that he had no waste in his body. He had no fat on his body. His body was in a perfect, beautiful physique form. And this beautiful torso that arched in towards this V shape with the perfect abs of the Prophet ﷺ, the most beautiful abs of the Prophet ﷺ that went into his heavy, muscled thighs and his heavy leg, his beautiful knees that was strong joints, and all of the joints of the Prophet ﷺ, as the Sahaba mentioned, were very strong and were very muscular. They were finely built upon the beautiful calves and the legs of the Prophet ﷺ, that were upon the fully fleshed feet of the Prophet ﷺ. The hands and the fingers of the Prophet ﷺ were fully fleshed. He didn't have flat feet. He didn't have any flaw or any discrepancy in his body that would cause him any kind of physical harm or any kind of physical deficiency or any a deficiency in his appearance. This was this beautiful 25-year-old man with this beloved Rasul vows that has transitioned from the innocent orphan, from the innocent child and the teenager, and into this beautiful man with the beautiful locks, beautiful gleaming face, the dense beard, broad shoulders, beautifully plated chest, the beautiful abs and the physique of the Prophet ﷺ on these strong legs and strong knees and beautiful feet of the Prophet ﷺ that would walk on his beautiful na'lain. That as we have the measurements, if you place your fingers like this together, 7, from the bottom of the heel of the Prophet ﷺ, 7, 5 in the middle, and 6 towards the top. If you put that together, that is the shape of the na'lain as it comes in the riwayat of the Prophet ﷺ, and the shape of the beautifully fleshed feet of the Prophet ﷺ. This beautiful, absolutely perfected man, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at this age of 25, that is walking between the streets of Makkah and winning the hearts of every single person. As it comes in the riwayah of Ma'bad, saying just from afar, as soon as you saw him, you were just awestruck. You were just left speechless. Your eyes was just like, wow. Until no sooner would he come closer towards you, and you were completely captivated. You were completely awestruck by the beauty of this man and the perfection of this man. As it comes in the words of Hassan ibn Thabit as-Sahabi, that it is as though it is as though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you as you wanted. That you got to just perfectly fine-tune everything you wanted. That's how perfectly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created you, O my Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. This was the beautiful man, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that walks through the streets of Makkah and now began to embark upon the trade with his strong hands and his hard-working body of the trade of grazing goats. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam entered in and worked in various fields, but at this age, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had become experienced in grazing goats, in the profession of a shepherd. And this is something that comes in the riwayat that every Nabi, every Prophet and Messenger that was sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was endowed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grow up and put in a position where he would be grazing goats. He would be in the position of a shepherd, because this was their tarbiyah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their preparation for nubuwah. Because as a shepherd, you have to work hard, and especially when it comes to grazing goats, those who are into agriculture and those who are into farming and animals will tell you they are harder than camels and cows and cattle. The hardest is grazing goats and sheep. Because when you are grazing goats and sheep, you, number one, you, like with any work, when it comes to working with animals, you have to develop that love and connection with them. You have to develop that trust with them. You have to earn their trust, and you have to become that person that is nurturing them, unable to speak their tongue, unable to quantify in words what you want to tell them, unable to know whether they're understanding what you're saying, unable to understand what they're saying. And with all of these challenges, without any of these forms of communication, you have to build a connection with them, and you have to build a method of communication with them until they learn to understand you and they learn to obey you. And you build this connection with their heart. You start to identify each sheep look the same to us, goat look the same to us, but you eventually know them so well that every one of these huge flock can become an individual to you, like a son, like a child. And you have that patience that it takes in order to graze and herd these goats and sheep, that you can't speak to them, you can't make them listen to you. How do you make them then follow you, and how do you look after them? You have to have that patience of their disobedience and them not understanding what you're trying to say. Even if you're saying in plain words, they won't understand. All of these things that you have to learn to become a messenger. When you start speaking to people who almost treat you like you're speaking a different language, who disobey you, who all look the same to you when they are disobeying you, but yet you know the names of every single one of them individually, and you learn how they need to be treated individually, how they need to be brought closer to Allah, how you can work on their tarbiyah, how you can work on them coming closer towards Allah and accepting His message. All of these things are actually significations or foreshadowing what the Prophet ﷺ has to do in his future as he is growing up. So now the Prophet ﷺ is the one who starts to work as a shepherd, grazing these goats and grazing these sheep. And as he begins to enter into the world of business, we see that the Prophet ﷺ, as well as his physical beauty, people start to work with him and they just love him even more. As we have the riwayat of the various people that worked with him, talking about his honesty and talking about how he was, work colleagues. When we can have friends and we can have people we know, but when it comes to business and when it comes to working with someone, that's when you start to see friendships change and people's relationship change, and you get to see the real nature of a person. And in reality, everyone wants someone who's easy going to work with. You want a brilliant work colleague. You want someone who's like your friend. And these people who work with the Prophet ﷺ, even in Nabuwah, they are saying, like Abdullah ibn Sa'ib, he's narrating, saying, whenever I work with the Prophet ﷺ, he was just so easygoing. He was so easy to work with. He never argued. He never quarreled. He would always stand up at the same time for what was right. He would always stand up for what he believed in. But at the same time, he didn't need to quarrel and argue. He wouldn't be strongly opinionated. He would listen to other people. He wouldn't quarrel over price and dispute. He just said, fine, whatever you say. He's not about, no, I said it's this much. He was always just so easygoing that, okay, whatever, as it goes, he'll always adapt. I'll always adjust, but I'll make it easy for everyone else. And he was always honest. Because when we would go to sell, we would put the good stuff, towards the back, and the more, worthless stuff towards the front and try to get it sold. He, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, would give everything its equal due. Because we would be those who would see that him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would be extremely honest and he would be extremely careful when he's making sure that the opposite person is also honored, and that he's a two-way prophet and not just one way. He would never just look at his own benefit. He would look at the benefit of the other person. And they would go on to say how selfless he was. They would go on to speak about his honesty. And they would go on to say that as well as being so easygoing and say, you know what, even if the opposite person was quarreling with him, he'd give in and say, you know what, okay, fine, let's just settle this. And he would settle it in an amicable manner so that there wouldn't be any arguments, and there wouldn't be any quarrels. He would just keep it easygoing for everyone so that the business was done. It would be a pleasure to work with, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is how they described the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But at the same time, when he believed in something, he wouldn't just let it go. He wouldn't say, okay, fine, I'll do it, even though it's wrong. He would never do that. And we have a riwayah where a person comes to him and tries to get him to, swear an oath in the idols. And the Prophet ﷺ said, I've always been averse to idols. I've never sworn, in these idols. I've never believed in these idols, and I never will. And he nicely, amicably stays firm upon his resolve, but at the same time, he doesn't, upset the person or quarrel with him either. He stays firm on what is right and what is haq, but at the same time, he doesn't look for a quarrel. This was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He would do business honorably and he would stop any dishonor, but he wouldn't at the same time, he wouldn't just let, he wouldn't quarrel, but he wouldn't allow someone else to do business dishonorably either. This was the perfect balance of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And a riwayah tells you that he was so, and this is something very important for me, and this is surprising. This is one of the very first stories that my father related to me of the seerah. The very first things that I remember my father telling me about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he was so honest and he was so punctual and he was so honest and integral when it comes to his meetings, that when once he had a meeting with a fellow colleague, and they had agreed the time, the place, and where they would meet. The Prophet ﷺ comes at the exact time, exactly punctual at that time, and that exact place. He comes and he attends the meeting, and now he is waiting for the opposite person who arranged the meeting to come. And he waits 1 day, he waits 2 days, he waits 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Minutes become hours, hours become almost a full day, until the Prophet ﷺ realizes he's not coming. And the Prophet ﷺ goes the second day, day 2, 24 hours after the meeting, he goes at the same appointed time to the same place, and he waits for this person. And again, minutes become hours, and hours become the day, and the person doesn't come. Until the third day comes, and the Prophet ﷺ comes to the same place, same time, and waits for the person. And after many hours, this person happens to walk by, and he looks to the Prophet ﷺ, greets him, says, "How are you?" And then he realizes, "Oh, I was supposed to meet you here 3 days ago, at this time in this place." And he comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and he says, "I'm so sorry, I completely forgot." And this person is scared because he knows how other people in Makkah work. And he said, the Prophet ﷺ didn't shout at him, didn't say anything. He just said, "I've been waiting here as we agreed in this position for you for 3 days, since that day and time that we agreed." And this is one of the first stories that my father mentioned to me about the Prophet ﷺ. And this was the honesty and integrity of the Prophet ﷺ as he walked in the streets of Makkah. And as he did this trade, he eventually started to develop himself, until from the grazing goats and working with individuals, he began to start going into actual trading and actual business of his own, as this fully developed man and one of the most beloved men of Makkah al-Mukarramah. And he begins to trade and trade until people start to talk about this Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is not dishonest. He's not, a shrewd businessman. He's not like anything we are. But it seems to be that as the moment he started doing business, he seems to be working himself up on the league table. He seems to be doing better than we are. And many of the Fortune 500s of the Makkah are like, what's going on? They were worried about their seats because of how well and how much barakah the business of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was working, until that news reaches another home in Makkah, a very influential, very rich home in Makkah, and one of the Fortune 500s and one of the Fortune 100s of Makkah, by a woman by the name of Tahira, known as Tahira, radiallahu anha. To find out who she is and what happens, learn this tomorrow when we continue the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Jazakallah khair wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.